Well, he's no stranger to the White House, and we are thrilled that Andy Stanley is in the house here at 100 Huntley Street for the entire month of August. He's a visionary pastor, a best-selling author. This is his latest, The Grace of God, and we are exploring the riches of God's grace as seen particularly in familiar Bible stories and characters. John Stott wrote, "Grace is love that cares and stoops and rescues." Rahab the prostitute is in the chapter titled Rescued by Grace. I never tire of looking at her story, Andy. I'm so glad you included her. She's as modern day as a woman in her position was then.
And not necessarily because of her involvement with prostitution, but because she had a label. And I grew up, she was Rahab the harlot, or we didn't use the word prostitute. And so, unfortunately, she had a label. She had a label in her culture. For many of us, she still has a label. And many of us have labels. We have labels that our parents put on us, that people put on us at work. We label ourselves, you know, stupid, unworthy, I'm not pretty. And so this is a story about how God's grace removes and changes our labels.
Here's our banner truth. When I say our, it's the royal we, it's really Andy's, okay? When it comes to your labels, current or past, God is slow to judge and more than willing to deliver.
Absolutely. And this is a story of that. This is a story of a woman who knew very little about the Hebrew God, but because of this famous story of Joshua and the Battle of Jericho, not only embraced the Hebrew God, but then God dipped down and did this extraordinary work of grace to where at the end of the story, she actually plays a prominent role in the history of not only Israel, but even our faith.
Prostitute to princess.
Yeah.
Really?
Prostitute to mother of kings.
Wow, wow.
Yeah.
And I'm impressed that despite some of the grotty history and behavior that we've already unpacked from the Old Testament, the God of the Hebrews was respected and feared.
Right. And again, this is one of the things we talked about in a previous conversation. It's difficult sometimes for modern Western readers of the Old Testament to understand the violence of the Old Testament, the blood in the Old Testament, and it almost seems like two different gods. But again, as we've said, as I say throughout this book, it is the God of grace who shows up in the beginning with creation, who stays involved with us through sin, and throughout the story of grace, intercepts people, rescues people, and throughout the entire Scripture, the theme is grace, 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 and this is just one of those exceptions, as you said, within the context of a very violent and difficult world for us to understand.
Now for Rahab and many other peoples living in the region at that time, the concept of a god was not foreign. They had lots of them. Right.
And they were regional. You had the god of your dirt. I had the god of my dirt. And as people went from place to place, sometimes they would actually take dirt with them, spread it out on the floor to worship their god, because God was a God of real estate. And here comes the nation of Israel, and they have no dirt. All they have are the leftovers of Egypt. And so they're worshiping a God that has never had a place, never had a temple, never had a location. And yet here's this reputation that preceded their God, and the people in the city of Jericho were afraid, even though this new God had now come to their real estate.
I think of a gladiator, Maximus unpacking his little
his
gods, and probably a little soil from his home there too.
Exactly, same idea.
And most of those gods were not very nice.
No,
which is, I think, part of the appeal of the God of the Hebrews.
And again, one of the things that's difficult for us to understand as we read the Old Testament is that the pagan gods were never concerned about the welfare of mankind. Even if you think back to what you learned about the Greek pantheon of gods or the Roman pantheon of gods, Jupiter, people were playthings. People were not important. People did not love the gods, they feared the gods. And they never assumed that the gods loved them either. So all of a sudden, this new God, this new idea of Yahweh comes on the scene that actually created people, that created a world for people. People weren't simply playthings. People were worth sacrificing for and redeeming. It was a brand new idea. And so Rahab the harlot is that unique person that transitions out of a pagan view of God to this new view of God. And God redeems her, rescues her, and then uses her in an amazing way.
Tell us quickly what she did to express her faith that this God was for her.
Yeah, well, she meets these spies who've come into the city of Jericho. We all know that story. and she hides them. She risks her life, and she says to them in this short conversation, we have heard about your God. We've heard about the power of your God. And in that conversation, she expresses faith in their God. To put it like a child, we think your God's bigger than our God. We think your God is more powerful than our God, which was an expression of faith. So she hid the spies, and they made her a promise. They said, because of your faith and because of this gift you've given us in hiding us and protecting our lives, God is going to deliver you. And God did way more than that. But then that's the nature of grace.
She and her whole family taken to safety.
Right.
And then she was the grandmother of Boaz, right? Am I
yes,
right?
She, it's really interesting. Think about this. She moves into the Israelite camp as Rahab the harlot. Okay, they have to tell the whole story. We met this woman. She's a harlot. There were strict laws in Israel, or not in Israel, but with the Jews then about someone of that reputation, but they took her in anyway. She was an exception to the rule. That's what grace does. She married a Jewish man named Salmon. They had a son named Boaz, who married Ruth, and Boaz and Ruth's great-grandson was King David. So here's this woman who has a label, who changes labels by the grace of God and is part of the lineage of our Messiah. And again, that's grace. Grace is what we don't deserve and goes far beyond what we would ever ask. And there it is again.
That's the heart of our God.
Yep.
Now let's speak to the heart of the person who is self-exiled.
Self-labeled, yeah.
Or self-labeled.
Yeah.
Speak to that. How do we do that?
Well,
One
of the things I love about being a pastor is I get to interact with people who have labels. Again, a label someone has put on them, a label they've put on themselves. And to expose them to this amazing story, not simply the story of Rahab, but the story of David, the story of Judah, the story of Peter who abandoned Jesus. Over and over and over, we are introduced to people through the Scripture who had labels, who had reputations, who had sins from the past that stuck to them like glue. And God came along time after time after time and said, I do not see you through the filter of that label. I don't see you through the filter of your behavior, and I don't look at you through the filter of your sin. I see you in a completely different way, loved, accepted, forgiven, and redeemed. And God is the great label changer, and He does that because of grace.
You know, Dr. Phil made a statement that I percolated on quite a bit. You can tell people who live within their labels because they lack passion. It's life-sucking.
Right.
It doesn't allow you to become
Right.
everything God created you to be and is prepared to help you become.
Right.
So we need to identify those lies and those labels and not self-exile. We are the right stuff. He came for us.
He
loves
created the
us.
world for us.
Oh, I love it.
And that's the liberating truth of the gospel that began in the Old Testament when God created the world for us and then just lavished His grace on us over and over and over. And for some people, it's an instant eye-opening experience when they understand God's grace. For some people, because of the label they've lived with for so long, it takes years and years and years. But the power of grace is such that eventually, if we expose ourselves to God's grace, it has the power to transform us from the inside out.
Andy, I'm sure you know this chorus. I love it. I will change your name. This is God. Your name shall no longer be wounded, outcast, lonely, or afraid. I will change your name. Your new name shall be confidence, joyfulness, overcoming one. Do you need to be rescued by grace? It's no secret what God can do. What He's done in my life, He will do for you. All the songs are coming back as I read your book, Andy. And you can read more about God's wonderful grace in Andy Stanley's new book. Here's how to get your copy.
The dilemma of Christianity, the dilemma of all religion, is what do I do about me, and what do I do about my past, and what do I do about my failure, and what do I do about my sin? What if we really have fallen short? What if you're condemned before God? What if you don't measure up and you're going to be held accountable? Then do you want what's fair? Then do you want what's just? I want exactly and precisely what I deserve the least.
The Grace of God by author and pastor Andy Stanley is our thanks to you for your ministry support. To receive your copy, call 1-888-288-0003 with your best ministry gift. You can write to Crossroads in Canada or the United States, or make a secure online donation at crossroads.ca.